He was already gone by the time the doctor leaned down and whispered those 4 words. The hallway outside my room smelled like floor wax and recycled air. Marcus had walked out 43 minutes earlier, I know, because I watched the clock on the wall the way you watch something when you're trying not to feel what you're feeling. His shoes made a specific sound on that linoleum. A quick sound. A man with somewhere to be sound. And I was lying there with an IV in my left arm, thinking, he'll come back. He always comes back. He didn't come back. But Dr. Elijah Caldwell did. And when he looked at me, really looked the way people almost never do, he went very still. Then he bent close enough that I could hear the quiet in him, and he said, "She's my daughter." He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the nurse behind him. But I heard every word. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I want you to understand that the same week my husband decided I was disposable, the universe sent me something I'd been missing for 38 years, without even knowing the shape of the hole. Some people get even. I got something better. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's up with me for this one. I need to take you back 6 years. Not because I want to live there again, I don't. But because you need to understand what I built and what I handed to someone who treated it like a short-term rental. It was a Tuesday in October when I met Marcus Hale. I was working a double shift at Grady Memorial, still in scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and bad cafeteria coffee, waiting for the elevator on the 4th floor. He was visiting a colleague, he said. He was wearing a jacket that fit well and carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive. He held the elevator door for me without being asked. Small thing. I noticed it anyway. I was 32 years old, and I had built my life with the kind of precision that comes from having nobody to fall back on. I grew up in foster care 3 homes before I was 10, 2 more before I aged out at 18. No family reunions, no emergency contact that meant anything. When I graduated from nursing school, I sat in that auditorium and looked out at all the parents with their cameras and their flowers, and I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Not sadness, exactly. Something more like hunger. I became a nurse because hospitals made sense to me in a way that homes never did. There were rules. There were procedures. When something went wrong, you followed a protocol. Nobody disappeared without documentation. By the time I met Marcus, I was a charge nurse in the cardiac unit at Grady. I had a savings account with $47,000 in it. I had a 2-bedroom condo in Midtown Atlanta that I'd put a down payment on myself, a used Honda that ran clean, and a small circle of friends who showed up when it mattered. I had built all of it from nothing. From less than nothing. From a starting point that most people don't recover from. Marcus was charming in that specific way that feels like sunshine in winter, warm enough that you lean into it before you check the forecast. He told me he was in medical equipment sales. He told me he was working on a contract that was going to change everything for him. He told me he admired how focused I was, how self-sufficient, how I didn't need anyone to validate me. I remember thinking that was an odd thing to admire. I thought self-sufficiency was just what you called survival when you wanted it to sound like a choice. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. He proposed at a restaurant I loved with a ring that was beautiful, and I said yes, with the kind of relief I didn't recognize as a warning sign until much later. We got married on a Saturday in April. Small ceremony, 22 people. I wore a dress I found at a consignment shop in Decatur, and it altered by a woman named Miss Gloria, who charged me $80 and told me I looked like somebody's answered prayer. I think about Miss Gloria sometimes. I think she saw something I wasn't ready to see yet. The first year was fine. The second year was fine. It was around year 3 that I started noticing the small things. The way Marcus's phone always landed face down on the kitchen counter when he came home. The way he said, "I'm handling it." Whenever I asked about the contracts, he was always almost closing. The way he'd get quiet after 9 p.m., not tired, quiet, a different kind of quiet, like a man doing math in his head. I told myself everyone had a private life. I told myself trust was a decision, not just a feeling. I told myself I was not going to be the kind of woman who checked her husband's phone. I kept all 3 promises to myself for longer than I should have. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that Marcus had started thinking of my stability as a resource. Not a partnership, a resource. The condo, the credit score I had spent a decade building, the name that had no complicated history attached to it, no defaults, no judgments, no red flags. He wasn't building a future with me. He was building a structure around me. And I was working double shifts and reorganizing the cardiac unit's triage protocols, and thinking I was in a marriage, not a blueprint. There's a word for what Marcus was doing. I didn't learn it until much later, sitting across from a forensic accountant in an office on Peachtree Street, watching her trace the lines on a spreadsheet with her finger. But I'll get to that. What I want you to hold on to right now is this. I was not naive. I was not weak. I was a woman who had survived everything the world had thrown at her by working harder and trusting carefully and building something real. I just didn't know that some people look at something real and see a foundation to build their lives on. The Tuesday ended up in the hospital. I had been feeling off for 3 days. Shortness of breath, a tightness in my chest that I kept diagnosing as stress because that's what medical professionals do. We give ourselves the least alarming explanation because we see the alarming ones every day, and we need to believe we are not one of them. By the time I finally walked into the ER at Atlanta Medical, not Grady, I couldn't go to my own hospital. I knew too many people my oxygen saturation was 91 and dropping. Pulmonary embolism, a clot that had been patient and quiet and waiting. I called Marcus from the triage room. He answered on the 4th ring. He said he'd be right there. He arrived 50 minutes later. And when he walked in, something was different about him. Not wrong exactly, just off. Like a photograph where the light source is slightly inconsistent and you can't figure out why until you look at it long enough. He sat in the chair beside my bed. He asked me how I was. He looked at his phone twice in 4 minutes. I noticed. I filed it away in that place, where I kept all the things I noticed and did not yet know what to do with. I didn't know it then, but that folder was about to get very full, very fast. The second time Marcus checked his phone, I counted the seconds. 11 seconds. That's how long he looked at whatever was on that screen before he turned it face down on his thigh. Not on the armrest. On his thigh, where the angle made it impossible for me to see even the edge of a notification. I was on oxygen. I had a pulse oximeter clipped to my finger and an IV running heparin into my left arm. And a doctor I'd never met explaining to me in careful language that I had come in at the right time, that another few hours might have looked different, that I needed to stay calm and keep my heart rate down. I was trying to keep my heart rate down. Marcus said, "You should have called me sooner." I looked at him. He looked at the wall. There's a specific kind of alone that's worse than regular alone. Regular alone is just empty space. You can fill empty space. But the other kind, the kind where someone is sitting 18 inches away from you and the distance between you is somehow infinite, that kind has weight. It presses down on your sternum like a second diagnosis. I had been feeling that weight for a while. I just hadn't put a name on it yet. The nurse who came in to check my vitals at 4:15 p.m. was named Denise. I know because I always read name badges, old habit, the kind you develop when you spend years being one of many in a system where names are the only thing that makes you specific. Denise had the efficient warmth of someone who had been doing this job long enough to read a room without appearing to. She glanced at Marcus. She glanced at me. She adjusted my drip without saying anything unnecessary, But when she reached past me to note something on the monitor, I caught it. The smell. It was faint. The kind of faint that means someone made an effort. But I have worked in hospitals for 15 years, and I have a nose trained by decades of identifying what doesn't belong in a sterile environment. This was a women's fragrance. Warm, slightly sweet, with something musky underneath. Not mine. I wear the same perfume I've worn since I was 26, a clean citrus scent I buy from a small shop on Auburn Avenue. This was nothing like that. It was on the left collar of Marcus's jacket, the side closest to me. I didn't say anything. I closed my eyes and breathed the way the respiratory therapist had shown me, slow, deliberate through the nose, and I thought about all the small things I'd been filing away for 2 years. The late nights framed as networking events I was never invited to. The weekend trip to Savannah he took alone, because I was working, and he said he needed to clear his head. The way he'd started paying for things in cash, which he'd never done before, which I'd noticed and told myself meant nothing. The folder in my head was getting heavy. Marcus stayed until 6 p.m. He said he had a meeting he couldn't reschedule. He said it with the specific cadence of a man who has rehearsed the sentence enough times that it no longer sounds rehearsed to him, Mom, but it still sounds rehearsed to everyone else. He kissed my forehead. His lips were dry. He said, "I'll be back tonight." He walked out, and his shoes made that sound again on the linoleum. Quick, purposeful, the sound of a man already somewhere else in his head. I watched the door for a moment after he left. Then I watched the ceiling. Then I watched the monitor tracking my heartbeat, steady, visible, honest, in the way that machines are honest, no interpretation required. Denise came back at 7:30 to check my chart. This time, she was alone. She hesitated at the door in a way that a person hesitates when they are deciding something. Then she came in and did what she came to do, and when she was about to leave, she stopped and turned and looked at me with that specific expression I know well, the one that says, "I know something I don't know how to tell you." She said, "Is there someone I can call for you? A family, a friend?" I said I was fine. She nodded slowly. The way people nod when they know you're not fine, but they respect the boundary. Then she said, I want to make sure you have what you need." She paused. "Someone was asking at the nurse's station about your room number. A woman, young. She left when I came out." I kept my face still. Years of bedside manner. "You learn to keep your face still." I said, "What did she look like?" Denise described her in the economical way that nurses describe things: height, build, approximate age, what she was wearing. Petite, mid-20s, highlighted locks, a yellow wrap dress that someone had chosen carefully. I knew before she finished. I didn't know the name yet. I didn't know the details yet. But I knew the shape of what I was dealing with, the way you know the shape of a room when the lights go out, not because you can see it, but because you've been living in it long enough. I said thank you. I said I appreciated it. I meant both things. After Denise left, I lay in the quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped. The hallway made its hallway sounds. Somewhere down the corridor, a family was having a hushed conversation that kept almost becoming an argument and then pulling back. I thought about the folder. I thought about the condo that had my name on the deed and my money in the walls. I thought about 6 years of double shifts and careful saving and a marriage I had entered in good faith and tended like something worth tending. And I thought about the woman in the yellow dress standing at the nurse's station asking which room I was in. Not Marcus's friend, not a colleague. Someone who knew which hospital he'd brought his wife to, someone who'd wanted to see. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Marcus. I opened my banking app instead, something I hadn't done in 3 weeks because I'd been pulling extra shifts and not paying attention the way I should have. The way you stop paying attention when you believe on some fundamental level that the person sleeping next to you is not your adversary. The joint account balance stopped me mid-scroll. 6 months ago, it had $34,000 in it. It had $1,200 in it now. I set the phone down on the blanket. I looked at it. I picked it up again and looked at the number again, because sometimes numbers need to be looked at twice before they become real. $1,200. My heart rate monitor ticked upward, just slightly, just enough. I put the phone face down on the blanket, the same way Marcus put his phone face down, I noticed, and I almost laughed at that, except nothing about it was funny. And I stared at the ceiling, and I thought, so that's what kind of meeting it is. I did not sleep that night. Not because of the clot, though. The heparin drip made my arm ache in a dull, persistent way that reminded me it was there every time I shifted position. Not because of the hospital sounds I've worked in, enough of them to sleep through beeping monitors and PA announcements, and the specific squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors. I didn't sleep because I kept doing math. $34,000 down to $1,200 in 6 months. I went back through every transaction I could remember. My direct deposit hit that account on the 1st and 15th of every month. I had been depositing $2,400 each cycle. 12 deposits over 6 months. That was $28,800 coming in, which meant somewhere between $60,000 and $62,000 had left that account in half a year. I am a charge nurse. I am not a forensic accountant. But I can read numbers, and those numbers were telling me a story I did not want to hear in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm at 2 a.m. I watched the ceiling turn gray, then pale, then the specific flat white of early Atlanta morning filtering through institutional blinds. Marcus did not come back that night. At 7:45 a.m., a different nurse came in for the morning vitals check. Young, efficient, a small gold cross at her throat. She told me my oxygen levels had improved. She told me the attending would be in by 9. She asked if I'd had breakfast yet, and I said no. And she said she'd have someone bring a tray. At 8:20, Denise appeared in the doorway, even though her shift had ended. She was in regular clothes jeans, a green cardigan, her hair down. She was holding her phone loosely in one hand, and she had the look of a woman who had made a decision on her drive home and then turned around. She came in and closed the door. She said, "I need to show you something, and I need you to understand I'm showing you, because I would want someone to show me." She turned her phone around. It was a photograph, posted publicly on someone's Instagram at 9:47 p.m. the previous evening, 3 hours after Marcus had left my hospital room for his meeting he couldn't reschedule. The restaurant was Bones on Peachtree Road. I knew it because Marcus had taken me there for our 3rd anniversary. White tablecloths. Waitstaff who remembered your name on the 2nd visit. The kind of place where the lighting is specifically designed to make everything look like a special occasion. Marcus was sitting across from a woman in a yellow wrapped dress. There were flowers on the table. Not the casual flowers of a restaurant centerpiece. A specific arrangement garden, roses in blush and ivory, the kind you order in advance, the kind that say this evening was planned. I looked at the flowers for a longer time than I looked at the woman, because I recognized that arrangement. I had seen it exactly once before, 14 months into our relationship, on a table at a different restaurant the night Marcus proposed to me. He had ordered the same flowers. He had a type, apparently, not just in women, in gestures. I handed Denise her phone back. I thanked her. She squeezed my hand once, firm, brief, the squeeze of a woman who knows words are insufficient, and then she left. I lay in the silence, and I let it move through me. The thing I had been almost knowing for 2 years, the thing I had been carefully not looking at directly, the way you don't look directly at something bright, because you know it will change what you can see afterward. I let myself look at it now. My husband had left me in a hospital bed with a pulmonary embolism to have dinner with another woman at the restaurant where he'd proposed to me. He'd ordered her the same flowers. He had taken $60,000 from an account that held my money, and I did not yet know where it had gone. There was a woman in a yellow dress who had come to my hospital to see which room I was in. This was not a man who had made a mistake. This was a man who had been running a parallel life with the careful logistics of someone who had thought it through. At 9:15 a.m., the attending came in. He was not Dr. Caldwell that would come later after they'd reviewed my imaging and called in a specialist consult. This was a younger doctor, thorough and kind, who explained my treatment plan and told me I was looking at 2 to 3 days minimum, possibly 4, depending on how my body responded to the anticoagulants. I asked him good questions. I took notes on my phone. I was present and focused and professional, because that is what I know how to be when the floor drops out. Marcus arrived at 11:30. He was in fresh clothes. His jaw was close-shaved. He brought coffee from the place 2 blocks from our condo, the place I loved. And he held it out to me like an offering, like a man who had done the calculus of the gesture and determined it would be sufficient. I took the coffee. I didn't drink it. He sat down and asked how I was feeling. And I said better. And he nodded and looked at his phone, and I watched him from behind the rim of the cup. And I thought, you have no idea what I know. You have no idea what the next 72 hours are going to do to you. That thought should have felt like power. It felt like grief instead. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about the moment you confirm what you already knew. It doesn't feel like discovery. It feels like loss. The loss of the story you'd been telling yourself. The loss of the version of your life where the math added up. And the man across from you was who he said he was. I grieved it in about 4 minutes, right there behind that untouched coffee cup, with the monitor tracking my heart rate and Marcus scrolling something on his phone. 4 minutes. Then I put it away. I had work to do. At 2:17 p.m., my nurse came in to tell me that the specialist had arrived to review my case. She said he was one of the best pulmonary surgeons in the Southeast. She said I was lucky they'd been able to get him. She said his name was Dr. Elijah Caldwell. I didn't know that name. I had no reason to know it. I filed it the way you file the name of any doctor you're about to meet, neutral, attentive, ready to assess. The door opened. Dr. Elijah Caldwell was 67 years old, tall with the composed, unhurried presence of a man who had spent 4 decades in rooms where panic was not useful. Silver at his temples. Reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Dark brown skin, deep-set eyes, a bone structure that was, he stopped. He was 3 steps into the room, and he stopped completely the way a person stops when their body receives information before their mind has processed it. He looked at me, not at my chart, not at the monitor, at me, at my face, at the scar above my left eyebrow, specifically the crescent scar I'd had since I was 4 years old, acquired in a fall at my first foster home, the one detail in every medical record I'd ever had. His face did something complicated and controlled and private. Then he turned to the nurse behind him, not to me. And in a voice low enough that it was clearly not meant for the room, he said, "She's my daughter." Marcus was sitting 2 feet away. Marcus was looking at his phone. Marcus heard nothing. But I heard everything. And in the 3 seconds of silence that followed, something shifted in the atmosphere of that room, something tectonic, something that had been building for 38 years underground. And I understood without understanding anything yet, that my life had just divided itself into before and after. And Marcus, who had spent 6 months quietly burning everything I'd built, had no idea he was sitting in the room where it happened. Dr. Caldwell recovered in under 4 seconds. I know because I counted. Old habit in cardiac care, you measure everything in seconds because seconds are the unit in which lives change. He composed himself with the efficiency of a man who had spent a career managing the distance between what he felt and what the room needed from him. By the time he reached my bedside, he was a physician again. Thorough, precise, present in the specific way that good doctors are present, like the only thing that exists right now is you and what your body is telling him. He reviewed my imaging. He asked me questions in a measured sequence, onset duration, any prior episodes, family history of clotting disorders. That last question. I saw something flicker behind his eyes when I said I don't know my family medical history. I was in foster care. He wrote something on the chart and did not look up immediately, and I used those 3 seconds to look at his hands. His left hand. The bone structure. The length of the fingers. I have my mother's hands. That's what Miss Gloria had said when she was fitting my wedding dress, running her thumb across my knuckles. You have your mother's hands, baby. Long fingers, a pianist's hands. I had smiled and said thank you, and not mentioned that I had never met my mother. Dr. Caldwell had the same hands. I filed that away in the folder that was no longer about Marcus. He finished his examination. He spoke to me about adjusted anticoagulation dosing, about the follow-up imaging we'd do in the morning, about what recovery looked like realistically. He was calm and specific, and I responded in kind because that is the register I operate. In the one that feels most like solid ground. But underneath it, in some quiet room inside me that I hadn't opened in years, something was sitting very still and paying attention to everything. Marcus was on his phone for the entirety of Dr. Caldwell's visit. Dr. Caldwell glanced at him once. Just once. The brief, assessing glance of a man who has learned to read rooms without appearing to. Then he looked back at me, and I saw something in his expression that I couldn't name yet, something careful and deliberate and patient, the look of a man who has been waiting a very long time and has learned not to rush the last mile. He said he would check in again that evening. He said it to me, not to the chart. He left. Marcus looked up from his phone approximately 4 seconds after the door closed. He said, "So, what did he say?" And I gave him the clinical summary in 2 sentences, and he nodded and said, "Okay, good," and looked back down. I made a decision in that moment. Not a dramatic decision, not the kind that arrives with a feeling of clarity and purpose like it does in movies. A quiet decision, the kind you make when you have been surviving your whole life, and you know that survival is mostly just the accumulation of small, precise choices. I was not going to react. I was not going to confront Marcus about the bank account. Not yet. I was not going to mention the photograph, or the woman in the yellow dress, or the flowers that were the same flowers from the night he'd proposed. I was not going to let him know that the ground had shifted, because Marcus believed I was in a hospital bed, weakened, dependent, distracted by my own body's failure. And that belief was the only advantage I had right now. And I intended to keep it until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I have a colleague, a woman named Patricia, who works in hospital administration and who's been my closest friend for 11 years. Patricia grew up in Bankhead and put herself through Georgia State and does not believe in wasted motion. She once told me the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is let them keep doing it. I texted Patricia at 3:40 p.m. I said, "I need you to find me a good attorney, not family law, financial, someone who handles fraud." She responded in 6 minutes. She sent me a name and a number. And then she sent a second message that said, "Don't tell me anything yet. Just call her." That was Patricia. Marcus left at 5 p.m. Another meeting. He said it with the same cadence as the day before. I nodded and said okay, and watched his shoes make that sound on the linoleum and felt nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of information. The feeling of a woman who has already begun the work of detachment. Dr. Caldwell returned at 6:45 p.m. He came alone this time. No resident trailing behind him, no nurse with a chart. He knocked on the open door with two knuckles, not the perfunctory knock of a physician entering a room, but something more considered. He came in and pulled the chair to a specific distance from my bed. Not the chair Marcus had used, the one on the other side near the window. He sat down. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me and said, "I owe you an explanation and an apology, and probably a great deal more than either of those things. And I recognize that you are in a hospital bed, and this is not the moment I would have chosen. But I've been looking for you for 34 years, and I've learned that waiting for the right moment is how you lose the only moment you get." I looked at him. I said, "The scar?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You've seen it before." He said, "In a photograph. Your mother sent me a photograph when you were 4 years old, 3 months before she died. You had just fallen. She said you were fine. She said you were—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together and looked at the window for 2 seconds. "She said you were the bravest child she had ever seen." The monitor tracked my heart rate. It went up 4 beats per minute. That was all I gave it. I said, "What was her name?" He said, "Renee. Renee Marie Caldwell before she married. She was 24 years old. It was complicated in the way that things are complicated when you are young and not yet brave enough to do the right thing at the right time. I was already married. I made choices I cannot justify. She moved away. She didn't tell me about you until it was almost too late. And then it was too late." He reached into the inside pocket of his white coat and produced a folded envelope. He placed it on the bed beside my hand. Not in my hand. Beside it, giving me the choice. I looked at the envelope. My name was on it, not my married name. My given name, Sophia Renee Moore, written in the handwriting of someone who had practiced it. I said, "How long have you known where I was?" He said, 3 months. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago. It took him 18 months to find you, and 3 months for me to— I needed to be sure. I had a DNA test done from a sample you provided during a routine blood draw at your primary care office, with the physician's knowledge and your physician's cooperation. I know that was an overreach. I know I should have come to you directly. I was afraid. I looked at him. This man, 67 years old, one of the most respected pulmonary surgeons in the Southeast, sitting in a hospital chair with his hands clasped and his voice steady and his eyes carrying something that had been heavy for a very long time. I said, "You were afraid I'd say no?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So instead you arranged to be my physician?" He said, "No, that was coincidence. The kind that feels like it isn't." He almost smiled. "I was called in because I'm the best available for your specific presentation. I didn't know you were my patient until I walked through that door." I believed him. Not because I'm trusting by nature, I'm not for reasons that should be obvious by now. But because I've spent 15 years reading people in high-stakes moments, and I know what performed sincerity looks like, and that this was not that. This was a man in the presence of something he had been carrying so long, it had changed the shape of him. I picked up the envelope. I did not open it. Not yet. I held it and looked at the window, where the Atlanta evening was doing what Atlanta evenings do in October, cooling fast, the sky going from orange to a deep, specific blue that I have always loved, without knowing why. I said, "I'm not ready to have this conversation tonight." He said, "I know." I said, "But I'm not saying no." He stood. He straightened his coat. He picked up the chart from the end of my bed and made a note and put it back. At the door, he stopped. He said, "Your mother named you Sophia because she said it meant wisdom. She said she wanted you to have something that couldn't be taken away." He left. I sat in the quiet for a long time. Outside, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does. Inside, something that had been an empty room in me for 38 years was very slowly beginning to have furniture in it. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Hale was at dinner with a woman in a yellow dress, completely unaware that the wife he had left in a hospital bed had just become someone's daughter, for the first time in her life. The letter stayed on the nightstand, unopened until 4 a.m. I know the exact time because that's when I finally reached for it. That specific dead hour, when the hospital settles into its quietest register and the only sounds are the distant hum of the HVAC system and the occasional soft footfall of a night nurse doing rounds. The hour when you stop negotiating with yourself about what you're ready for. I opened it carefully. Old habit. I have always opened things carefully, as if the carefulness itself might soften what's inside. There were 3 things in the envelope. The first was a letter. 2 pages handwritten in the same careful script as my name on the outside. Dr. Elijah Caldwell wrote the way he spoke, measured, precise, with the occasional sentence that broke its own rhythm, because the feeling behind it was too large for the structure he'd built. He wrote about Renee, about meeting her at Morehouse School of Medicine, where she was a first-year student and he was a third-year resident. About 6 months that he described as the best and most cowardly period of his life. About the choice he made that he had been paying interest on for 38 years. About the private investigator and the photograph from the blood draw, and the 3 months he had spent sitting with her file on his desk every morning, trying to find the right words, which he had ultimately decided did not exist. So he had written wrong ones instead and hoped she would forgive the inadequacy. He wrote, "I have no right to ask you for anything. I'm not asking. I am only telling you that I'm here, that I have always been looking. And that whatever you decide, I will consider it the correct decision because it will be yours." The second thing was a photograph. Old, slightly faded, printed on the thick, glossy paper of the early 1990s. A young woman I had never seen before, sitting on the front steps of a house I didn't recognize, holding an infant against her chest with the specific grip of a new mother, tight, slightly uncertain, ferociously protective. The woman was beautiful. High cheekbones, long fingers, a crescent scar above her left eyebrow. I looked at that scar for a long time. Then I looked at the infant's face. Soft and unformed, the way all infant faces are. But the bone structure already emerging underneath, already becoming the face I see in mirrors. The third thing was a single folded piece of paper. A DNA results summary from a certified genetic testing laboratory. Dated 11 weeks ago. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. I refolded all 3 things. I put them back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer of the nightstand, underneath the Gideon Bible that has been in that drawer since the hospital was built. Then I lay back and looked at the ceiling, and let the information settle into me, the way medication settles. Not immediately, not all at once, but finding its way into every part of you, until you cannot remember what you felt like before it. I had a father. I had a father who was one of the founding partners of Caldwell Marsh Medical Group, the largest private hospital network in Georgia, with facilities in Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, and Macon. I knew the name because everyone in Atlanta healthcare knew the name. Caldwell Marsh had 200 employees. They had just broken ground on a 5th facility in Buckhead. Dr. Elijah Caldwell was not merely a respected surgeon. He was an institution. I filed that information in the new folder, the one that was not about Marcus. Marcus called at 10:15 the next morning. He did not come in person. He called. He said he was caught up with something and would try to get by in the afternoon. He said it with the smooth, apologetic cadence of a man who has said it enough times that it no longer requires any real cognitive effort. I said, okay. I said I was feeling better. I said, take your time. He did not hear the change in my voice. He was not listening for it. At 1:30 p.m., Patricia arrived with a container of jollof rice, masarana, from the place on Cascade Road that I love, and a look on her face that meant she had done research I hadn't asked her to do yet. She sat down. She opened the container and handed me a fork. And she said, "Tell me what's happening." I told her. Not everything, not Dr. Caldwell, not yet that was still too new to say out loud. But Marcus, the bank account, the woman in the yellow dress, the flowers. Patricia listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. She has the patience of someone who understands that information given space arrives more completely than information that gets interrupted. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The attorney I sent you, her name is Sandra Okafor. She handled my cousin's situation 2 years ago. Your cousin's situation was a man who had been using her business accounts to fund a second household for 3 years. Sandra got her everything." I said, "I haven't called her yet." Patricia said, "Call her today, from this room, before Marcus comes back." I called Sandra Okafor at 2:15 p.m. She answered on the second ring. She had a voice like a woman who has heard everything and is not surprised by any of it, which was exactly the voice I needed. I gave her the outline. In 10 minutes, she asked 4 specific questions. Then she said she would need access to the joint account statements going back 18 months, any documentation I had on shared assets and any record of financial transactions made in my name. That last part made me go still. I said, "Transactions made in my name." She said, "Yes. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" I said, "I'm not sure yet. I need to look at some things." She said she would have a preliminary assessment ready within 48 hours and that I should not move any money sign, anything, or have any financial conversations with my husband until we had spoken again. I said I understood. I said it calmly. Marcus arrived at 4 p.m. He brought nothing this time. No coffee, no gesture. He came in and sat down and looked at me with an expression I had seen before, but never correctly identified until this moment, the expression of a man who is present in body while already being somewhere else in every way that matters. He stayed 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. At the 7-minute mark, his phone buzzed twice in his pocket. At the 9-minute mark, he shifted in his chair the way a person shifts when they are about to stand up. At the 11-minute mark, he stood up and said he had to go, that he had a call with a supplier that couldn't wait. I said, "Marcus." He stopped. I said, "Are we okay?" I asked it the way you ask a question, when you already know the answer, when what you're really doing is watching how a person responds to a question they don't expect. His face did 3 things in approximately 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, the arranged expression of reassurance. He said, "Of course we are. You're sick." "I've been stressed. We're both it's a hard week. We're fine." I nodded. He left. I picked up my phone. I went to the joint account app, and this time, I didn't just look at the balance. I went into the transaction history, and I scrolled back 18 months. And I started reading every line. I am a detail-oriented person by nature and by training. In cardiac care, you develop a specific relationship with data. You learn to look at a number not just as a number, but as a story. What came before it? What came after? What the pattern means when you zoom out far enough to see the pattern. The pattern I was looking at now had a name. It took me 40 minutes to find it, a series of transfers to a business account, a company called Hale Tech Solutions, LLC, registered in Georgia, and when I cross-referenced the registration date with the timeline of our marriage, I found that Hale Tech Solutions, LLC, had been incorporated 4 months after our wedding. I typed the name into Georgia's business registration database. Registered agent, Marcus D. Hale. Secondary registered agent, Sophia M. Hale. I had never heard of Hale Tech Solutions, LLC in my life. My name was on it anyway. I put the phone down on the blanket. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about Sandra Okafor's question. Any record of financial transactions made in your name? There it was. The thing about a trap is that it doesn't feel like a trap while you're in it. It feels like a marriage. It feels like a shared life. It feels like the reasonable accumulation of two people building something together. The trap only reveals itself when someone removes the camouflage. And the camouflage in this case had been 6 years of ordinary Tuesdays and coffee from the place I loved, and a proposal with garden roses in blush and ivory. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been using me as infrastructure. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., Marcus sent me a PDF via text message. No phone call first, no conversation. A PDF attached to a text that said, "Sophia, I think we both know this hasn't been working. I've had these drawn up. It's straightforward. Sign, and we can both move on." I opened the PDF. It was a divorce petition. Filed the previous afternoon in Fulton County, filed, while he was sitting in my hospital room telling me we were fine. The asset division was thorough in the way that documents are thorough when someone has had time to think them through. The condo, listed as marital property to be sold and divided equally despite the fact that I had purchased it 14 months before we married. The joint accounts, what remained of them, split 50-50. And a clause buried on page 4 that I almost missed, that structured the dissolution of Hale Tech Solutions, LLC in a way that assigned its outstanding debts, $340,000 in business loans, equally between both registered agents, equally between me and Marcus. I read that clause 3 times. Then I called Sandra Okafor. She answered on the first ring. I said, "He filed yesterday, and I need you to look at something on page 4. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't respond to the text. I'll be there within the hour." I set the phone down. Outside the window, Atlanta was going about its morning traffic on the connector, a helicopter somewhere. The city doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware that in a hospital room on the 7th floor, a woman was sitting very still in the specific posture of someone who has just watched the full shape of something reveal itself and found that it was worse and also more manageable than she had imagined. I was not destroyed. I was informed. There is a significant difference. Sandra Okafor was 51 years old and wore her natural hair in a low, silver-streaked puff and carried a briefcase that looked like it had seen the inside of every courtroom in Fulton County. She arrived at 9:52 a.m. in a charcoal blazer and flat shoes, and she shook my hand with the grip of a woman who does not waste pressure. She sat down. She opened her briefcase. She put on reading glasses and held out her hand, and I gave her my phone with the PDF open to page 4. She read for 90 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "How long have you known about Hale Tech Solutions?" I said, "Since last night." She said, "And you had no knowledge of the incorporation, no participation in any business activities, no signature on any founding documents?" I said, "I have never heard the name Hale Tech Solutions until I found it in the transaction history." She looked at me over her glasses. She said, "Your signature appears on the incorporation paperwork filed with the Georgia Secretary of State." I said, "I know." She said, "Is it your signature?" I thought about that for a moment. About the stack of documents Marcus had handed me over the years, refinancing paperwork, insurance updates, the occasional form he said was routine, babe. Just sign here, I've already reviewed it. About the way I had trusted the frame around the document more than the document itself, the way you do when you believe you're in a partnership and not an operation. I said, I don't know. I need to see the original. She nodded once, the nod of a woman who has heard this before and knows exactly what it means. She said, here's what I'm looking at. Hale Tech Solutions, LLC was incorporated in February of the year following your marriage. It has taken in $847,000 in business loans over 4 years from 3 separate lenders. Of that, $619,000 has been dispersed in ways I cannot yet trace from this document alone. The remaining balance of outstanding debt is $340,000. This petition attempts to assign half of that debt to you as a co-registered agent of the dissolved company. She paused. If you signed those incorporation documents knowingly, you have exposure. If you didn't, or if that signature was obtained under false pretenses, then this is fraud. Potentially wire fraud given the interstate nature of the lending. She let that settle. I said, what do I do? She said, first, you do not sign this petition or any document Marcus sends you. Second, I need you to call your bank today and remove Marcus as a joint account holder and freeze any remaining shared assets. Third, I'm going to need access to every piece of paper that has your name on it from the last 6 years. Every document he asked you to sign, every account you share, every asset in both names. She paused. She said, I also need to know, is there anything else? Anything you haven't told me yet? I looked at the window for a moment. I said, there's something else, but I need to understand it better before I know how it's relevant. She looked at me steadily. She said, all right, when you're ready. She packed her briefcase with the efficient movements of a woman who had already begun building the case in her mind, and she left me with her direct number written on a card in precise block letters. At 11 a.m., Dr. Caldwell knocked twice and came in. He was in his white coat chart in hand, fulfilling the professional pretext of a morning check. But he looked at me when he came in the way he had looked at me from the beginning, like a man counting something he had almost lost. I said, I read the letter. He stopped. He nodded. I said, I looked at the photograph. He said, yes. I said, I have some questions. He pulled the chair to the same spot as the night before and sat down and folded his hands and looked at me with the patient attention of a man who has been waiting 38 years for questions and will take as long as they require. I asked them in order. The way I do things, systematic, specific, no preamble. I asked about my mother's death. He said she died of a cardiac arrhythmia, undiagnosed at 27. He said the irony of a cardiologist's daughter presenting with a clot was not lost on him, and he had been managing that particular weight since the moment he walked through my door. I asked if he had other children. He said yes, 2 sons from his marriage, grown, both in medicine. He said he had told them about me 3 months ago when he found me. He said their responses had been complicated, and that was his burden to carry, not mine. I asked about his wife. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Eleanor passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. We had 31 years together, and she was a good woman, and she knew about Renee, and she knew about you. She knew before we married. I told her everything. She said it was the past. She said if you ever found your way back to us, she would want to know you. He paused. She didn't get the chance. I sat with that. I said, she knew. He said, she knew. Eleanor was not a woman who wasted energy on things she couldn't change. She was very much like you, from what I can see. I looked at him. I said, you don't know me yet. He said, no, but I'd like to. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, I need to tell you something about my situation. Not because I need your help. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you this because of what you are or what you have. I'm telling you because it is relevant and because I think you should know." He said, "All right." I told him about Marcus, about Hailtech Solutions, about the PDF, about Sandra Okafor and the fraud, and the $340,000 in debt attached to my name. I told him factually without inflection, the way I give a clinical report. When I finished, he was very still. He said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "Well, based on what I can see, 4 years, possibly longer." He said, "And you had no idea?" I said, "I had feelings I didn't act on. That's different from no idea." He accepted that distinction without comment. He said, "Do you know what Marcus does for work, his actual work?" I said, "He told me medical equipment sales." Dr. Caldwell looked at me for a moment. He said, "Marcus Hale has been attempting to secure a supply contract with Caldwell Marsh Medical Group for the past 8 months. I know this because it came across my desk for final review last month. The contracting committee had concerns about the company's financial documentation. The review is ongoing." The room was very quiet. I said, "He doesn't know." Dr. Caldwell said, "That you're my daughter, no. He cannot know. As of yesterday, I didn't know you were his wife." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. Marcus had spent 4 years building a financial structure on my name. He had used my credit, my reputation, my signature. He had leveraged me as a foundation while conducting a parallel life. He had filed for divorce in a way designed to transfer $170,000 of fraudulent debt onto me and walk away clean. And he had done all of this while simultaneously pursuing a contract with a company run by the man who had just discovered he was my father. I thought about the word coincidence. Dr. Caldwell had used it the night before, the kind that feels like it isn't. I thought about the way Marcus looked at his phone in this room. The way he hadn't looked at Dr. Caldwell at all, the way you don't look at someone who doesn't register as relevant to you. He had sat 18 inches from the most important development of my life and seen nothing because he was too busy managing his own angles. I said, "What is the status of the contract review?" Dr. Caldwell said, "Pending. The committee meets in 10 days. I said, "I need to speak with Sandra Okafor again this afternoon." He said, "Is there anything I can do?" I looked at him. This man, my father, sitting in a hospital chair with his hands folded and his eyes steady, and 38 years of a debt he was trying to pay the only way he could. I said, "Not yet, but I'll tell you when there is." He nodded. He stood. He adjusted his coat with the precise movements of a man returning to his professional self. At the door, he paused. He said, "For what it's worth, the way you're handling this, the steadiness. Your mother had that. It was the thing about her I admired most and the thing I was least equipped to deserve." He left. I picked up my phone. I called Sandra Okafor. I said, "There's something I need to tell you. It changes the landscape significantly." She said, "I'm listening." I told her about Dr. Caldwell. All of it. The letter, the photograph, the DNA results, sitting in the nightstand drawer under the Gideon Bible. I told her about the Caldwell Marsh contract, about Marcus's 8 months of pursuit, about the committee meeting in 10 days. Sandra was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said in a voice that had acquired a new quality, not excitement exactly, but the focused energy of someone who has just watched a case rearrange itself into something significantly more favorable. "Sophia, I need you to listen to me carefully." I said, "I'm listening." She said, "Marcus walked into a building and signed documents and made phone calls and moved money for 4 years. He built something. He thought he knew what he was building on. He did not know what he was building on." She paused. She said, "That's going to matter. A great deal. Outside the window, Atlanta was bright and indifferent and continuous. Inside, I was beginning to understand the full geometry of what Marcus had constructed and the single foundational miscalculation that was about to make the whole thing come down. He had chosen the wrong woman to use as his foundation. Not because I was powerful, because of who had been looking for me. I was discharged on a Thursday morning, 3 days after I had arrived through the ER with a clot and a husband who made a sound like a man with somewhere to be. I left with adjusted medication, a follow-up appointment, and a folder of documents Sandra Okafor had messengered to the hospital the previous evening, organized, tabbed, annotated in the margins in her precise block handwriting. Dr. Caldwell signed my discharge paperwork himself. He handed it to me at the nurse's station and said in the professional register he used when other people were present that he would see me for follow-up in 2 weeks. Then he said quieter, just before he turned away, "Patricia called me. She said you'd need a car. There's a driver waiting at the main entrance. Don't argue about it." I almost argued about it. I didn't. The driver took me to Patricia's apartment in Decatur, not to the condo. I had already made that decision, not a dramatic decision. Not a scene, just the simple logistics of a woman who understood that returning to a shared space before the legal architecture was in place was not a risk worth taking. I had packed what I needed the night before a bag Patricia had brought me with clothes and my laptop, and the small fireproof box I kept under the bed at home. The one Marcus didn't know about, the one with my original deed, my nursing license, my social security card, and $8,000 in cash I had been adding to since my second year of nursing because I had grown up in a system that taught me at a cellular level that you keep something they can't touch. Marcus didn't know about the box. There were things about me Marcus had never thought to look for. Patricia met me at the door with coffee and the particular expression of a woman who has been managing her feelings about a situation for 3 days and is now allowing herself to have them. She hugged me for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to mean something, short enough not to require me to perform a reaction I wasn't ready for. Then she took my bag and put it in the guest room and told me to sit down and eat the eggs she had made. I sat down and ate the eggs. At 10:15 a.m., Marcus texted, "You were discharged this morning. Where are you?" I read it and put my phone face up on the table, which was new. At 10:47, he texted Sophia. At 11:23, he called. I watched the screen. I did not answer. Patricia watched me not answer. She said nothing. She refilled my coffee. Sandra Okafor called at 2 p.m. with what she called a preliminary landscape assessment, which was her way of saying she had spent 3 days pulling threads and had found more than she expected. She said Hailtech Solutions, LLC had been used as a pass-through entity. Loans taken out under the company had been routed through 3 sub-accounts before being dispersed, some to a personal account in Marcus's name alone, some to what appeared to be a jointly held account with a second party she had not yet fully identified. The incorporation documents held by the Georgia Secretary of State bore a signature in my name. She had sent the document to a forensic document examiner that morning. Results within 72 hours. She said the 3 lenders who had extended business loans to Hailtech had been contacted by her office. All 3 were cooperating. One had already flagged the account internally for review after irregularities in the renewal documentation. The word she used was irregularities. The word she did not use, but that sat clearly in the space between her sentences, was fraud. She said the divorce petition Marcus had filed contained a statutory financial disclosure form required under Georgia law, in which Marcus had declared his personal assets and liabilities. She had cross-referenced this declaration against the business loan documentation and the banking records I had provided. There were discrepancies, significant ones. The legal term for filing a materially false financial disclosure in a divorce proceeding in Georgia was perjury. She said she would need one more thing from me. She needed me to be in a room with Marcus, with witnesses present before she was ready to move. Not to confront him, confrontation at this stage, was counterproductive. She needed him in a specific context, on record, in a setting where what he said and what he believed could be documented. She had something in mind. She would explain when the time was right. I said I understood. I called Dr. Caldwell at 4 p.m. He answered on the second ring. I had his direct number now. He had written it on the back of the discharge instructions, below his signature in that same careful script. I said, "The Caldwell-Marsh Contracting Committee, the one reviewing Marcus's application. When is the next scheduled meeting?" He said, 9 days from now, Tuesday the 14th, 3 p.m. conference room on the 4th floor of the Buckhead facility. I said, "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to understand why before I ask it." He said, "All right." I explained Sandra's plan. Not all of it. She hadn't given me all of it yet. But the shape of it. She needed Marcus in a room where what he said was on record. The contracting committee meeting was a room where Marcus would be performing competence, performing legitimacy, performing the version of himself he had been constructing for 4 years. A room full of people with the authority to give him what he needed. A room where he would say things that could be compared against other things he had said elsewhere, saying, you know. Dr. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. He said, "You're asking me to let the meeting proceed." I said, "I'm asking you to let it proceed and to make sure Sandra has access to the recording." Another pause. He said, "The meetings are recorded as standard practice for compliance purposes." I said, "I know." He said, "Sophia." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you sure about this? Not the strategy. Sandra knows what she's doing. I mean, are you sure you want to be in that building? Because I think you should be there. I think you should be in that room." I had not thought about that yet. I sat with it for a moment. I thought about Marcus in that room. Marcus performing. Marcus saying the words he had been rehearsing for 8 months. The carefully constructed presentation of a man with legitimate business interests and clean documentation. And a wife whose name and credit and signature formed the invisible scaffolding of everything he claimed to have built. Marcus looking around a conference table at the people who could give him the contract that would legitimize 4 years of construction. Marcus not knowing I would be sitting at that table. I said, "Yes, I want to be there." Dr. Caldwell said, "Then you'll be there. I'll arrange it." He paused. Then he said, "There's something else. I've been speaking with my attorney about the estate, about what my recognition of you means legally and what I want it to mean practically. I want to be transparent with you about this, not because I expect it to influence anything between us, but because you deserve to have complete information and make your own decisions with full knowledge." I said, "Tell me." He said, "Caldwell-Marsh Medical Group was incorporated as a family partnership. The founding documents include provisions for biological children. My attorney has confirmed that your recognition, if you choose to pursue it legally, which is entirely your choice, would constitute a legal claim to a portion of the partnership, a meaningful portion." I was quiet. He said, "I'm not telling you this I want to be clear that this is not contingent on anything. You are my daughter, regardless of what any document says. But I believe you should know." I said, "How meaningful?" He said, 31%. The room was quiet. Patricia was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around the sound of a cabinet, opening the specific creak of the 3rd drawer that always needed adjusting. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life that was real and continuous regardless of what was happening in the rest of it. I said, "I need some time with that." He said, "Take all the time you need." I said, "But I want to be in that room on Tuesday." He said, "You'll be in that room on Tuesday." 9 days. Marcus spent those 9 days sending me messages I did not answer and calling numbers I did not pick up. And according to the process server Sandra dispatched, attempting to have the divorce petition personally delivered to Patricia's address, which meant he had figured out where I was, which meant he had resources I hadn't fully accounted for, which Sandra said was not a problem, it was information. And information was always preferable to absence of information. On the Friday before the Tuesday, Marcus sent a final message. It was longer than the others. It had the careful architecture of something written and revised multiple times. It said that he knew I was upset. It said that the petition was not what it looked like. It said that Hail Tech was a legitimate business venture that had simply not performed as expected, and that the debt was a shared marital liability, not a personal one. It said that he still cared about me. It said that he hoped we could handle this like adults. It said that he had been under a great deal of pressure and had made some decisions he regretted, and that he would like the opportunity to explain in person. He did not mention Amber. He did not mention the flowers at Bones on Peachtree Road. He did not mention the $619,000. I read the message twice. I forwarded it to Sandra. I put my phone down. On Monday evening, Dr. Caldwell called to confirm the logistics for the next day. He said my name had been added to the committee roster as a newly appointed advisory consultant, a title his attorney had confirmed required no formal board approval for a single meeting. He said there would be 7 people in the room, including himself. He said Marcus was scheduled to present for 40 minutes, beginning at 3 p.m. He said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Ready." He said, "Good." A pause. "Sophia?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Whatever happens in that room tomorrow, I want you to know that the outcome of the meeting is secondary to me. Whatever Marcus does or doesn't do, whatever Sandra's strategy yields, none of that changes what I drove to that hospital to say. I need you to know that." I said, "I know." He said, "All right." He said good night, and I said good night. And I sat in the quiet of Patricia's guest room with the Atlanta dark outside the window, and Sandra's tabbed folder open on the desk, and a set of clothes I had chosen carefully hanging on the back of the door. A structured wool blazer in deep navy, a silk blouse, the kind of outfit that says nothing loudly, that communicates through its restraint. I thought about Marcus walking into that building tomorrow. I thought about him in the elevator going over his presentation, rechecking his slide deck, managing his expression into the configuration of a credible man. I thought about him walking into that conference room. I thought about the moment he saw me. I did not feel angry. I had moved through angry during those 9 days at Patricia's apartment quietly in the early mornings, before she was awake standing at the kitchen window, with coffee letting it move through me the way weather moves through real and present, and then gradually passed. What I felt now was something cleaner. The specific calm of a woman who has done the preparation and is ready for the day. I turned off the light at 10:30. I slept without difficulty. Tomorrow, Marcus Hale was going to walk into a room and meet the full geometry of what he had built on a foundation he had never thought to examine. I had been that foundation. He was about to find out what it was made of. The Caldwell Marsh Buckhead facility was 11 stories of glass and steel on Peachtree Road, the kind of building that communicates permanence without announcing it. No ostentatious signage, no architectural excess, just the quiet confidence of an institution that has never needed to prove itself to anyone walking past. I arrived at 2:15 p.m. 45 minutes early. Old habit. In nursing, you learn that the person who arrives early controls the room before the room begins. The lobby had marble floors and a reception desk staffed by a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried efficiency of someone who has been the first impression of this building for a long time. She checked my name against a list, handed me a visitor badge, and directed me to the 4th floor with the specific courtesy reserved for people whose names appear on important lists. The conference room was at the end of a corridor lined with framed photographs. The groundbreaking ceremonies, the ribbon cuttings, the milestones of an institution built over 4 decades. I walked past them slowly. In the photographs from the early years, Dr. Caldwell was younger, sharper-jawed, his expression carrying the particular intensity of a man building something he intended to last. In the later photographs, the intensity had refined into something steadier. The look of a man who had built what he set out to build and was now responsible for its continuity. I stopped at one photograph near the end of the corridor. It was from approximately 20 years ago, a staff event of some kind, informal people standing in clusters with drinks. Dr. Caldwell was at the edge of the frame, slightly turned away from the camera, laughing at something someone had said. His profile was clear and unguarded, in the way profiles are when a person doesn't know they're being photographed. I looked at his profile. I looked at mine in the glass of the frame. I kept walking. Sandra was already in the conference room when I arrived. She was at the far end of the table, a legal pad in front of her, 2 pens, aligned beside it, her briefcase on the floor at her feet. She looked at me when I came in and gave a single nod, the nod of a woman who has done this before and knows that the pre-game silence is its own kind of preparation. Dr. Caldwell arrived at 2:30 with 2 other committee members, a woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, who ran the Savannah facility, and a man named Gerald Marsh, Jr., son of the co-founder who handled the financial oversight of the network. They were introduced to me as advisory consultant, a title that registered on their faces as unremarkable, which was the point. The other 3 committee members arrived in the following 10 minutes. By 2:55, the table had 7 people, and the particular charged stillness of a room that is waiting for something. At 2 p.m., Marcus walked in. He was in a suit I recognized, charcoal gray, well cut, the one he reserved for what he called the big ones. He was carrying a leather portfolio. His shoes were polished. His expression was configured into the version of himself he had spent 8 months cultivating for this room, confident without arrogance, prepared without rigidity, the face of a man who belonged here. He was 3 steps into the room before he saw me. I watched it happen. The configuration held for approximately 1 second after his eyes found my face. A trained observer might have missed it. I am a trained observer, and I did not miss it the microsecond of pure unmanaged surprise, the almost imperceptible break in the architecture of the performance, the moment before his mind caught up with his face and reassembled the expression into something controlled. He reassembled it quickly. I'll give him that. He looked at Dr. Caldwell. He looked back at me. He looked at Sandra, whom he did not recognize, and filed her in the category of committee member. Dr. Caldwell said, "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. Please sit down." Marcus sat down. He placed his portfolio on the table in front of him with the deliberate movement of a man re-establishing his relationship with solid ground. He looked at me one more time. His expression said, "I don't know what this is, but I will manage it." Mine said nothing. Dr. Caldwell opened the meeting with the standard formalities: quorum, confirmed, recording initiated per standard compliance protocol, agenda distributed. Then he said, "Mr. Hale, the floor is yours." Marcus presented for 38 minutes. I will say this about Marcus: he was good at this. He had the specific talent of a man who has learned to make the absence of substance feel like the presence of it. The well-timed pause, the confident deployment of industry terminology, the slide deck that looked thorough without being interrogatable. He covered the company's service history, the proposed contract terms, the pricing structure, the timeline for implementation. He mentioned Hale Tech Solutions as the parent company 11 times. He described it as an established medical supply operation with 4 years of operational history and a demonstrated record of client service. He did not mention that its registered agent was a woman sitting 12 feet away from him. At the 38-minute mark, he concluded and opened the floor for questions. Gerald Marsh Jr. asked 3 questions about pricing that Marcus answered smoothly. Dr. Owens asked about the company's insurance coverage. Marcus answered without hesitation. Then, Sandra Okafor, who had been silent for 38 minutes with her pen aligned beside her legal pad, looked up. She said, "Mr. Hale, I have a few questions about the company's financial documentation." Marcus looked at her with the pleasant attentiveness of a man who is not yet concerned. He said, "Of course." She said, "The business loan documentation submitted with your contracting application lists. Hale Tech Solutions, LLC as the borrowing entity, with 2 registered agents as personal guarantors. Mahai, can you confirm the identity of both guarantors for the record?" Marcus said, "Myself and my business partner." Sandra said, "Can you name the business partner for the record, please?" A pause, barely a second. But I felt it. Marcus said, "Sophia Hale." Sandra said, "And can you describe the nature of Sophia Hale's involvement in Hale Tech Solutions? Her role, her participation in business decisions, her awareness of the loans taken out in the company's name." Another pause, longer this time. Marcus said, "She's a co-founder. She's been involved from the beginning." Sandra reached into her briefcase. She produced a document and slid it to the center of the table. She said, "This is a sworn affidavit signed 3 days ago from Sophia Moore Hale, attesting that she had no knowledge of Hale Tech Solutions, LLC, prior to discovering its name in joint banking records while hospitalized. Laisan, that she did not knowingly sign any incorporation documents for the company, and that she did not participate in any business decisions or loan applications made in the company's name." She paused. She said, "The name Sophia Moore Hale may be familiar to some of you. She is currently seated at this table." 7 heads turned. Marcus turned last. He looked at me. I looked back. I kept my face the way I keep it in high-stakes moments, still present, giving nothing away that I did not choose to give. Sandra said, "Mr. Hale, I'd also like to direct the committee's attention to Exhibit B." She produced a second document. She said, "This is the preliminary report from a forensic document examiner retained by my office assessing the signature appearing on Hale Tech Solutions incorporation documents as filed with the Georgia Secretary of State. The examiner's finding, with a confidence level of 94.7%, is that the signature attributed to Sophia Moore Hale on those documents does not match her authenticated signature samples and shows characteristics consistent with simulation, that is, copying of a signature from another document rather than original execution." The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a room full of careful professional people simultaneously recalibrate what they are looking at. Marcus had gone very still. Not the stillness of composure. The stillness of a man whose internal systems are running faster than his exterior can manage the stillness of calculation of assessment of a person trying to find an exit in a room that has just revealed itself to have none. Dr. Caldwell said in a voice of absolute professional neutrality, "Mr. Hale, would you like to respond to what's been presented?" Marcus looked at Dr. Caldwell, and I watched something happen on his face that I had never seen there before. Not in 6 years of marriage, not in the careful performances of normalcy, not even in the hospital room when he had sat 18 inches from his own unraveling. He looked afraid, not of Sandra and her documents, not of the committee and their collective recalibration. He looked afraid of Dr. Caldwell specifically, and I'd understood in that moment that something had shifted in Marcus's understanding of the geometry of the room. He had walked in believing he was in a business meeting. He was in a room where the man at the head of the table was the father of the woman whose signature he had forged. He didn't know if Dr. Caldwell knew that yet. He was trying to calculate it. Dr. Caldwell looked back at him with the expression of a man who has all the time in the world. Marcus said, "I'd like to I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of Sophia's, Sandra said, Mr. Hale. Before you continue, I want to make sure you're aware that this meeting is being recorded for compliance purposes, as stated at the outset. Anything you say here is on record. Marcus stopped. He looked at his portfolio. He looked at the table. He looked at me one more time, and his expression had shed everything now. The performance, the configuration, the carefully maintained face of a man who belonged in the room. What was underneath was smaller and less certain and oddly familiar to me, because I had glimpsed it occasionally over 6 years in unguarded moments before he remembered to put the architecture back up. It was the face of a man who had always known on some fundamental level that the thing he was building was not real. He said, "I think I need to speak with an attorney before I respond to any further questions." Sandra said, "That is absolutely your right." Dr. Caldwell said, "The committee will recess for 30 minutes. Mr. Hale, you're welcome to use the small conference room down the hall to make any calls you need to make." Marcus stood. He picked up his portfolio with both hands, which was new. He was a one-hand man, always the portfolio carried loosely with the ease of someone accustomed to carrying things. Both hands meant something had changed in his relationship with his own steadiness. He walked to the door. At the door, he stopped. He turned and looked at me one final time. I don't know what he was looking for. Recognition, maybe? Some version of the woman he had married who would meet his eyes with something he could use. Some remainder of the Sophia who had trusted the frame around the document more than the document itself. I gave him nothing. Not coldness, not triumph, not the performed indifference of someone who is actually feeling a great deal. Just the steady, specific regard of a woman who is fully present in the room she is in, looking at a man she used to know. He left. The door closed. Gerald Marsh Jr. exhaled slowly through his nose. Dr. Owen said to no one in particular, "Well." Sandra made a note on her legal pad. Dr. Caldwell looked at me from the head of the table. Just looked. The way he had looked at me in the hospital room with the counting quality, the tallying of something recovered. I looked back. Outside the 4th floor windows, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta always does. Continuous, bright, indifferent to the specific gravity of individual rooms. Traffic moved on Peachtree Road. A construction crane turned slowly against the October sky. The city going about its business. Inside, in the particular silence that follows, a structure coming apart. 7 people sat with what they had just witnessed. I sat with what I knew. The dominoes had been standing for 4 years. I had just watched the first one fall. The small conference room down the hall was not soundproofed. I know this because Denise, the nurse from the hospital, who had become in the past 2 weeks something closer to a witness than a stranger, had once told me that in institutions built to impress the walls between the important rooms and the adjacent ones are thinner than they appear. She was talking about hospital administration at the time. The principle, it turned out, was transferable. Marcus was on the phone for 22 minutes. I know because Sandra had stepped into the corridor to make her own calls, and she noted the time with the precision of a woman who understands that duration is itself information. When the committee reconvened at 3:47 p.m., Marcus's seat was empty. Dr. Caldwell looked at the empty chair for a moment. Then he looked at Gerald Marsh Jr. and said, "I think we have sufficient information to make a determination." Gerald nodded once. Dr. Owens made a note. The other committee members shifted slightly in their chairs with the specific micro-movements of people who are ready to conclude something. The vote on the Hale Tech contracting application took 4 minutes. It was unanimous. Sandra drove me back to Patricia's apartment. We did not talk for the first 10 minutes, which was its own kind of communication. The silence of 2 women who understand that some things need to breathe before they become words. Then Sandra said, The forensic examiner's report gives us the foundation, combined with the financial disclosure discrepancies and the loan documentation. We are looking at forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, and perjury in the divorce filing. The question now is whether we pursue criminal referral or leverage for civil settlement. I said, "What's the difference in outcome?" She said, "Criminal referral means we hand the evidence to the DA's office and Marcus faces potential prosecution. Timeline uncertain, 18 months to 3 years, outcome not guaranteed. Civil settlement means we use the evidence as negotiating leverage to obtain full dismissal of the divorce petition, full indemnification from the Hailtech debt, and recovery of the funds removed from the joint account. Timeline 4 to 8 weeks. Outcome largely in our control." I said, "What would you recommend?" She said, "Civil with criminal referral held in reserve as leverage. In my experience, a man looking at forgery and perjury charges who is offered a clean exit will take the clean exit." I said, "What does the clean exit look like for him?" She said, "He drops the petition. He signs a full indemnification agreement, removing your name from Hailtech and its debts. He provides a full accounting of the $619,000 in disbursements and repays to the joint account whatever can be recovered. In exchange, we do not pursue criminal referral contingent on full compliance." I said, "And if he doesn't comply?" She said, "Then we refer, and he explains to a Fulton County jury why a forensic document examiner found his wife's signature was simulated on company and corporation documents." I said, "Send him the offer." She sent it that evening. Marcus's attorney responded within 14 hours. 14 hours. Sandra called me when the response came in, and I could hear in her voice the specific satisfaction of a woman whose read of a situation has been confirmed. She said, "He wants to negotiate the repayment amount. Everything else he's prepared to accept." I said, "What's his position on repayment?" She said, "He's claiming $340,000 of the dispersed funds went to legitimate business expenses and is not recoverable. He's offering $279,000. I said, "What's your read?" She said, "I think he spent more than he's admitting on the parallel life, Amber, the apartment, the car, the dinners. I think $340,000 is closer to accurate. But I also think we can get to $310,000 without going to court. And I think that's the better outcome given your timeline and your energy." I said, "Get to $310,000. She got to $310,000 in 2 days. The settlement agreement was signed on a Friday morning. Marcus's attorney transmitted the executed documents to Sandra's office at 9:47 a.m. I was at Patricia's kitchen table with coffee when Sandra called to tell me. She read me the key provisions in her measured block print voice petition, dismissed indemnification, executed repayment, structured over 18 months, with a personal guarantee. Hailtech Solutions LLC formally dissolved with all liability allocated to Marcus D. Hale as sole remaining registered agent. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "Thank you, Sandra." She said, "You did the work. I just organized it." I said, "Send me your invoice today." She almost smiled. I could hear it. She said she would, and she said goodbye, and I put the phone down on Patricia's kitchen table and looked out the window at the Decatur morning. A dog walker on the sidewalk. 2 kids on bikes, a woman in scrubs getting into her car for an early shift, the ordinary continuous texture of lives being lived. Patricia came in from the hallway where she had been giving me privacy she pretended not to be giving me. She sat down across from me and looked at my face and said, "Done." I said, "Done." She poured herself coffee and we sat in the quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of 2 women who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. Then she said, "What about the other thing?" Not a question. Patricia knows me well enough to know that I process sequentially one matter closed before the next one opens. I said, "I have dinner with him on Sunday." She said, "How do you feel about that?" I thought about it honestly, the way I have learned to think about things without the noise of what I'm supposed to feel or what the situation suggests I should feel, just the actual texture of what is there. When I sit quietly with it, I said, "Careful," and something else I don't have a word for yet. Patricia nodded. She didn't push. One of her many gifts. The news about Marcus moved through Atlanta's medical community with the specific velocity of information in professional networks where reputation is currency. I did not spread it. Sandra's office did not spread it, but Marcus had spent 8 months pursuing a contract with Caldwell Marsh, which meant he had spent 8 months making himself known in those circles, and the withdrawal of the application combined with the sudden dissolution of Hailtech Solutions created a shape that people who operated in those circles recognized without needing to be told the details. By the following Wednesday, 2 of the 3 lenders who had extended loans to Hailtech had initiated formal recovery proceedings. By Thursday, I received a call from the property management company Marcus had been using. Apparently, Hailtech had leased office space on Northside Drive under the company name, with my signature on the lease. The lease was 3 months in arrears. Sandra handled it. My name was removed within 48 hours. On Friday morning, Patricia forwarded me a screenshot without comment. It was from a mutual acquaintance's Instagram story. Amber in what appeared to be a departure photo bag stacked by a door caption that said simply, "New chapter, new city, new everything." I looked at it for a moment. I did not feel what I might have expected to feel. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter. The recognition that a structure had collapsed and the people who had been inside it were now navigating the aftermath of the collapse in their own ways, which was no longer my concern. I put the phone down and went back to the financial documents Sandra had sent for my review. Marcus called me once during that week. Once. From his personal number on a Tuesday evening at 7:15 p.m. I looked at the screen for the full duration of the ring. I put the phone face up on the desk. I let it ring. When it stopped, I sat in the silence for a moment and thought about the last time I had let his calls go unanswered in the hospital, on oxygen, with the monitor tracking my heart rate. And the folder in my head getting heavier by the hour. I thought about the woman I'd been in that room, careful, deliberate, already beginning the quiet work of what came next. I thought about how much had changed in 3 weeks. Not me. I had not changed. I had been this person the whole time, the person with the fireproof box under the bed, the person with the emergency fund, and the attorney on speed dial, and the capacity to sit with what I knew, until I understood what to do with it. Marcus had simply stopped being the weather I was navigating. The condo sold faster than Sandra expected, a cash offer within 10 days of listing above, asking from a young physician who was relocating from Charlotte. My equity from the premarital purchase, protected by the settlement agreement and documented by the original deed in the fireproof box, came to $187,000. Sandra had structured the settlement so that every dollar of my premarital contribution was ring-fenced and recovered. The wire hit my personal account on a Thursday. I sat with that number on my phone screen for a long time. $187,000, plus the $310,000 repayment beginning the following month, plus the $8,000 in the fireproof box, plus my salary, which had continued through all of this, because I had gone back to work at Grady the Monday after my discharge on modified duty per Dr. Caldwell's instructions, because the work had always been the thing that made sense when nothing else did. I was not wealthy. I was not starting from nothing. I was starting from something real, built with my own hands, recovered from someone who had tried to make it disappear. That felt like enough. That felt like more than enough. On Sunday evening, I drove to a restaurant in Inman Park. That Dr. Caldwell had suggested a quiet place. He said good food, not the kind of room that requires performance. I arrived 7 minutes early. He was already there at a corner table in a dark jacket without his white coat, for the first time since I had known him. He looked like a regular person, which startled me slightly and then made sense. He stood when he saw me. He did not hug me. We were not there yet. And he seemed to understand that, seemed to have a calibration for where we were and where we weren't, that I appreciated more than I could yet say. He said, "You look well." I said, "I am well." We sat down. We ordered. We talked carefully at first in the register of two people who are navigating a new language, testing the syntax, finding the rhythms. He told me about his sons, about the older one, David, a cardiologist in Chicago, who had called him twice since learning about me. Conversations that were difficult and necessary and ongoing. About the younger one, James, a hospitalist in Savannah who had said less, but whose silence Dr. Caldwell read as processing rather than rejection. He said he was not asking me to manage those relationships. He said they were his to navigate. He said he only wanted me to know they existed. I told him about growing up. Not all of it, not yet, but some of it. The third foster home, the one in Macon where the woman who ran it had a vegetable garden and let me help her in it on weekends. And that was the first time I understood that things grew from almost nothing if you gave them the right conditions. The nursing school auditorium. Miss Gloria and the dress. He listened the way Dr. Caldwell listened, with the complete attention of a man who understands that what is being offered is not just information. At the end of the evening, when the check had been paid and we were putting on our coats, he said, "I know this is slow. I know we are a long way from anything that resembles easy. I just want you to know that I am not going anywhere." I said, "I know." He said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because you've been looking for me for 34 years. People who look that long don't stop when they find what they were looking for." He looked at me. He said, "No, they don't." Outside Inman Park was doing what Atlanta neighborhoods do on Sunday evenings, settling into itself, the restaurants full, the sidewalks unhurried, the city finding its Sunday register. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment after we said goodnight and watched him walk to his car, this man, my father, 67 years old, and carrying 38 years of a particular weight that was very slowly beginning to shift. My phone buzzed. Patricia. How was it? I typed back, "Good. Really good." She sent back a single emoji, a small green plant. I looked at it for a moment. Then I got in my car and drove through the Atlanta evening toward whatever came next, which was mine, which was real, which no one had built on without my knowledge, or could take without my consent. Behind me in the rearview mirror, the city lights did what city lights do. They kept going. 3 months after the committee meeting, Dr. Elijah Caldwell and I had dinner for the 12th time. I know it was the 12th, because I had been counting without meaning to, the way you count things that matter before you've fully admitted to yourself that they matter. The first 6 had been at restaurants, careful and calibrated, 2 people learning the grammar of something neither of us had words for yet. The 7th had been at his house, a measured colonial in Buckhead that smelled like old books and good coffee, and the particular quiet of a home that had been well loved and was now learning to be something new. The 8th through 11th had rotated between his house and Patricia's apartment, and once memorably a Sunday afternoon at the Botanical Gardens, where we walked for 2 hours and talked about everything except the things we were really talking about. The 12th was at his house. He cooked. I had not known he cooked. It was the kind of thing you don't know about a person until you are in the actual texture of knowing them. Well past the formal meals and the careful conversations, into the territory where ordinary information starts to accumulate. He made shrimp and grits with a recipe he said came from his mother, my grandmother, a woman named Hattie, who had grown up in Valdosta and believed that a proper meal was an act of intention. I sat at his kitchen counter and watched him cook and thought about the word grandmother. About all the words I'd been acquiring over 3 months that I had never had before. Father. Half-brother David, who had called me directly 6 weeks ago, a conversation that was 34 minutes long and awkward in the specific way of two people who share blood and nothing else yet, which is itself a beginning. Grandmother posthumous knowable, only through photographs and recipes, and the careful testimony of a man who loved her and missed her, and set a pot on the stove the way she taught him. These were not small things. I had been treating them carefully the way you treat anything that is new and real and fragile at the edges, not holding too tight, not holding too loose, just present with them, letting them become what they were going to become. We ate at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room. His choice. I noticed it and appreciated it without saying so. He asked me about work. I had been back at Grady full-time for 2 months. Cleared by my own cardiologist, not Dr. Caldwell Ethics, required a different physician. Though he had reviewed my chart with the barely concealed intensity of a man who finds professional neutrality difficult when his daughter's health is involved. I told him about a case that week, a patient who had come in presenting with symptoms everyone had read as anxiety, and which I had read as cardiac, and the attending who had pushed back, and the attending who had ultimately listened, and the outcome. He listened with the complete attention of a clinician, and the separate, deeper attention of a man whose daughter works in a hospital, and cannot help calculating the stakes involved in every story she tells. I said, "You're doing the thing." He said, "What thing?" I said, "The thing where you are listening to the clinical facts and simultaneously running a parallel track about whether I am safe." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Is it that obvious?" I said, "I do it too, with patients whose families remind me of something." He looked at me. He said, "I suppose that's not surprising." I said, "No." He smiled. It was the smile I had been accumulating data on for 3 months, the one that arrived slightly delayed, as if it had to travel from somewhere deep before it reached his face. I had started to recognize it the way you recognize a specific quality of light, not every time, but reliably in the moments when something true had been said. After dinner, he brought coffee, and we sat in the living room, where the bookshelves covered 2 full walls, and there was a photograph on the mantelpiece that had not been there the first time I came to the house. It was the photograph from the envelope, the one from the early 1990s. Renee on the front steps of a house I didn't recognize, holding an infant with the ferocious grip of a new mother. I had given him a copy 3 months ago. I had not asked if he would display it. He had decided on his own. I looked at it for a moment. He followed my gaze. He said, "I hope that's all right." I said, "It's your house." He said, "It's also your mother." I looked at the photograph and thought about Renee Marie Caldwell, 24 years old on the steps of a house in whatever city she had moved to, holding a child she had decided to raise alone rather than complicate a life that was not ready to hold her. I thought about what it cost to make that decision, what it cost to send a letter and a photograph 3 months before she died to a man she had loved and who had failed her because she needed someone to know the child existed, even if that someone had not yet become the person who deserved to know. She had been 27 when she died, 3 years younger than I was now. I thought about what she would have made of this room this evening, this accumulation of recovered things. I thought she would have been satisfied. I said, "Tell me something about her. I don't know yet." He set down his coffee. He thought for a moment, the genuine thinking pause, not the performative one. He said, "She laughed before things were funny, not at things before them. Like she could see where a moment was going and she was already there. It was disorienting at first. You'd be in the middle of saying something and she would start laughing and you'd think you'd missed something, and then 2 seconds later you'd arrive at the funny part and realize she'd been waiting for you." I sat with that. I said, I do that. He said, I know. He said it quietly with the specific weight of a man who has been watching for 3 months and cataloging the way I catalog, the way I suspect Renee cataloged all of us, apparently people who keep careful inventories of the things that matter. I stayed until 9:30. At the door, he said, as he always said, that he would see me soon. And as I had started doing recently, I said yes instead of we'll see. Small shift, significant one. I drove home my apartment now, a 1-bedroom in Kirkwood that I had found and signed for with my own name and no co-signer and no one else's history attached to it. The kind of apartment that is small and particular and entirely yours, and I stood at the window for a while after I got in. Atlanta at night does a specific thing with light. The city is spread out enough and hilly enough that from certain windows you can see it arranged like a conversation, clusters of brightness, intervals of dark, the whole thing continuous and various and alive. I thought about Marcus, not with anger, not with grief. Those had moved through and passed the way weather moves. I thought about him the way I sometimes think about difficult cases that resolved with the distant clinical interest of someone who has processed the information and filed it correctly. I had heard through Patricia, who heard through the hospital network, that Marcus had taken a position with a small equipment company in Charlotte, that the Fulton County lenders had reached a repayment arrangement, that he had moved out of the apartment on Ponce de Leon, that it turned out Hailtech had been funding. I did not know where Amber was. I had not looked. Some chapters close without requiring a final page. What I thought about standing at that window was not Marcus or Amber, or the 6 years, or the $619,000, or the forged signature, or the divorce petition filed while he was sitting in my hospital room telling me we were fine. I thought about a Tuesday in October, about a hospital room on the 7th floor, about a man who stopped 3 steps inside a door and went very still. I thought about 4 words whispered to a nurse standing behind him, not meant for me, heard by me anyway. She's my daughter. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. The worst thing that happens to you is sometimes the room where the best thing was waiting. Not because suffering is instructive. I'm not interested in the idea that pain is pedagogy. But because we are not always looking in the right direction until circumstances remove the option of looking anywhere else. I was in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, and a husband who had already left when my life divided itself into before and after. I did not choose the room. I did not choose the timing. I did not choose to be the daughter of a man who had been searching for me for 34 years and happened to be the best available pulmonary specialist for my specific presentation. What I chose was what I did once I was in the room. I chose to be still long enough to hear what was happening. I chose to keep the folder, to count the seconds, to text Patricia instead of confronting Marcus, to call Sandra instead of signing the papers, to hold the envelope and read it at 4 a.m. when I was ready and not a moment before. I chose to say not yet instead of no. Those were not dramatic choices. They were quiet ones, the kind that accumulate slowly into a life that is actually yours. I am not going to tell you that I am healed, because healed implies a return to a previous state, and I have no interest in returning to any previous state. I am not going to tell you that everything worked out perfectly, because some things are still in process. David and I are still in the awkward grammar of early brotherhood, and there are still mornings when I wake up and feel the ghost of the life I thought I was living, and the apartment is sometimes very quiet in ways that have not yet become comfortable. What I am going to tell you is this. 3 months ago, I was a woman who had built everything she had from nothing, who had been careful and precise and good faith, and who had still found herself in a hospital bed, watching her life being used as infrastructure for someone else's ambitions. Now I am a woman who has a father who puts photographs on his mantelpiece and makes his grandmother's shrimp and grits and watches me from across a kitchen counter with the expression of a man who is still 3 months later not entirely sure this is real. Now I'm a woman with a Kirkwood apartment that smells like my candles and nobody else's decisions. Now I'm a woman whose name is on things she chose to put her name on. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. The Atlanta night arranged itself outside my window, continuous, bright, various. I stood there a little longer than necessary, which is something I have started doing recently, staying in moments of beat past when I would have moved on before. Letting things be what they are. Letting the good ones land. Then I went to bed. In the morning, I had an early shift. I had patients to see. I had work to do. I had, for the first time in my life, a father who would call to check that I got home safe. And when my phone lit up at 9:47 p.m. with his name on the screen and a text that said, simply, "Home safe," I typed back, "Home safe," and meant it in every way that a person can mean something. I want to leave you with something before I go. Not advice, I'm not in the business of telling people how to live. But an observation from a woman who has spent her life building things carefully and learned the hard way to examine the ground she was building on. The people who underestimate you are not always wrong about your circumstances. Sometimes your circumstances are exactly as limited as they believe. What they are always wrong about is the conclusion, the idea that circumstances are the whole story, that what you have right now is a reliable measure of what you are capable of. That the ground you're standing on is the only ground there is. Marcus saw a woman with a stable income and a good credit score, and no family to complicate things. He saw a foundation. He did not see the woman who had built herself out of nothing, who kept a fireproof box under her bed, who had 15 years of learning to read rooms that most people couldn't read, who had a father she didn't know about, yet who had been looking for her for 34 years. He saw the surface. He built on the surface. And surfaces, no matter how solid they appear, are not the same as foundations. You are not the surface. Whatever you are standing in right now, whatever room, whatever bed, whatever version of the life you thought you were living, you are not only what is visible from outside. You are also the fireproof box, the folder, the text sent at 2:40 in the afternoon when you finally decide to act. You are the quiet choices that accumulate when no one is watching. Keep building. Keep the box. And when someone walks into a room and sees something in you that changes their face, stay still long enough to find out what they know. Some of the most important things in your life will arrive in rooms you did not choose. Your only job is to be present when they do.